my friend and I went out. We actually skipped school. Don't do this, kids, but we skipped school and went off to the protests against duck hunting out in West Wyalong, which was, well, at that time felt like forever away from where we lived in Western New South Wales. And we spent a few days out there. That was Laurie Levy, who's still going strong and doing amazing work against duck hunting. And yeah, that was an amazing experience. I mean, difficult, challenging. We went out in canoes, and the hunters were shooting, around us, and we would be looking out for birds that were injured, and drop into the water and go and rescue them. And I remember, us taking one duck onto the boat, and I had blood coming out of its beak, and it was just like a very, very sad experience. Never sure if I should say this part of the story, but there was one duck hunter who was, because I think we were 17 at the time, or 16 maybe. There was a very cute duck hunter who started talking to us. And I think it's like an important component, because it humanizes the other side, because you go into it and you're like, they're the enemy and we're the saviors. And that experience also helped me to understand. I mean, it sounds a bit silly to say, but understand that these are people on the other side with their own worldviews and their own experiences, and they're not evil necessarily. They just have a different perception of the world and our place in it. So, or perhaps they're just following their cultural tradition and their fathers and their grandfathers, traditions of what they like to do. So. So did the duck hunting protest. There was a fur protest in the city, I remember, through the CBD. My friend and I went to the opera house to opening night at one of the fancy opera performances, and everybody was there in their, beautiful clothes. And we pre-made little stickers saying "fur is murder." And we were sneaking around and putting them on the backs of women wearing fur coats. Yeah, I was a teenager.
I love that. That's great. That's great.
But no, it was very active, and there was a lot of tabling and leafleting and things like that.
Yeah, very hands-on. I guess you had to be, didn't you then? There was no other way. And that was incredibly brave. I mean, duck hunting is a big part of the culture here in New Zealand as well. I think we have 6 weeks of it or something starting very soon in May of every year. And it's a heartbreaking time. And I would not want to be out there with all those hunters trying to go in there and rescue the ducks. That was incredibly brave what you did. And very, very valuable as well. So.
You made a great point as well about, the humanization of, they're not necessarily the enemy. Because I know many hunters myself, who, their kids get dragged along to it and they don't necessarily enjoy it. But it's because what dad and granddad do, they go shoot ducks, and the kid gets dragged along, and that's what is conditioned into them, that this is okay to do, and there's many who don't like it, who still, they go along because that's what their family does. But once they actually start seeing what happens, especially with duck hunting, there's so many that are shot, which are never retrieved. And so they are just purely killed for the sake of killing. And it's such a sad thing. And I hope that there's plenty more protests out here. I'd love to see the vegan mags, actually, to be honest, taking a bit more of that old school approach and getting some more of these protest words out there, eh?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
In partnership with your father, Brian, together you founded the non-profit organisation Voiceless in 2004, one of Australia's leading influential and cutting-edge animal protections groups. Voiceless represents animals in a court of law and incorporates school learning with a large focus on youth and education, debating, and my favourite, critical thinking. The organisation and its teachings play an invaluable role in shaping our future politicians, CEOs, and creatives like us, to name a few. What was it that spurred the creation of Voiceless and honed your focus on that legislative change for the animals?
Yeah, going back, so this is 2002. I I was working in the environmental protection movement because there weren't really jobs in the animal protection movement at that time. Also, I'm passionate about environmental protection as its own cause, of course. But I remembered my pledge to my dog Bronny, and I was always looking for opportunities to do something for animals. My dad had just sold his financial management companies and was a little bit at a crossroads. So I, in a stroke of genius, if I might say so myself, I managed to convince him to come to Los Angeles with me to a 5-day animal rights conference. He was always an animal lover, and he actually went vegetarian about 5 years after I did. But he wasn't involved. He didn't really know, about the issues in detail. And so we went to this. It was 5 full intensive days in a hotel near the airport in LA. And it happened that it was just like an amazing, remarkable conference. There was, all the leaders of the animal rights movement were there. Peter Singer, Karen Davis from the United Poultry Concerns, Carol Adams, I think, was there. We saw an early edit of the film Earthlings, and just heard, like got a comprehensive analysis and assessment of the animal rights movement, both in the US and internationally. And at the end of that, he was very traumatized, and he said, look, we got to do something. And I was like, great. So we decided to start our own organization. And he came from this kind of business corporate world and had, very different ways of thinking and doing things versus me, who'd always been really in the nonprofit world. And so we started Voiceless with a vision to be very mainstream, very inclusive and embracive, because animal groups at the time were seen as very extremist and radical and weren't taken seriously. There was really no media coverage of animal issues at all. It just had a very negative reputation. So we wanted to bring in, people who were in all different kinds of areas and industries, to show that this concern is a concern that all Australians share and all Australians have and should have. So we started with a broad grants program to support the animal movement to grow and flourish, and strengthen other activists and other advocates. And our focus was, quite strategically on factory farming, because we felt, or one of the things we really learned at that conference is, the extent and, the shocking numbers of farmed animals who, are suffering. So we felt that, can help more animals, gives us the biggest bang for our buck, is the most strategic approach. So law and education my father was always passionate about the law side, and I was always passionate about the education side, although I think law is extremely important area to be working in. But from the beginning, we invested time into both those areas, and we hired the first ever animal lawyer in Australia, and our approach was to always try to capacity build and promote the growth. So it's not just us out there campaigning and saying things, but we're just like constantly bringing in more and more people to grow and strengthen the movement, including the animal law movement, which just didn't exist there yet, but had gotten off to a good start in the US. So we were following that model. And we saw some really good progress in those areas, and especially you look today at the animal movement, and it's just, so much bigger and stronger and more mainstream than it was. So I think, not that we're taking all the credit for that, but I think that approach was a sound approach looking back. Because you need an army. If this is like a war against animals, we need the resistance army to go in and create peace for animals. So we just need more people who are educated, in the issues, who have the tools, have the expertise to be, fighting and disrupting the current systems.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And it's a great example of how us coming together in a couple of ways is so fantastic. Having that conference, in the first place, got that always ticking, but then having you and your father, there's different sides of the coin, really, I suppose, in the mindset, come together, making something unique and really
formidable team.
Yeah, and it really just one thing that is very crucial for us at Vegan FDA here is about collaboration, and that's at the core of all of what we do. And it's having those folks who have the different talents to you and coming together and using it as a combined force. And we need to build that army, and we especially need strategists like yourself, who can help to direct that into the correct places.